Your weak habits don't arrive with warning signs. They enter quietly dressed as comfort, excuses, and just one more time. You call it rest. You call it coping. But every lazy decision is signing a contract with a future you haven't met yet. Most people think their future gets destroyed by one massive mistake. No, it gets destroyed by small repeated choices nobody notices. Sleeping when you should build, scrolling when you should think, quitting when things become uncomfortable. And the terrifying part, your habits don't steal your future overnight. They do it slowly enough that you keep believing you still have time. It doesn't start with chaos. It starts with silence. That one habit you refuse to question because it feels too small to matter. You tell yourself it's nothing, just a break, just a moment, just a delay that doesn't change anything. But habits don't need permission to grow. They only need repetition. And repetition is something you give freely without realizing what you are building in return. A weak habit never looks dangerous in the beginning. It looks soft, harmless, almost comforting. It feels like control when in reality it is control being taken from you in pieces so small you don't even feel the theft. You think you are choosing it, but slowly it starts choosing for you. One decision becomes a pattern, and the pattern becomes a direction, and the direction becomes a life you never consciously agreed to walk into. You don't wake up one day and lose your potential. You surrender it in fragments. Every time you say later, something inside you shifts slightly, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to make discipline feel heavier the next time. And that heaviness becomes your new excuse. You start negotiating with your own standards like they are optional rules instead of the foundation of everything you want. The mind is clever in protecting comfort. It will rewrite failure as rest, delay as planning, distraction as relief, and you accept these rewrites because they are easier to live with than truth. Truth demands action. Truth demands discomfort. Weak habits thrive in anything that delays discomfort, even if that delay quietly dismantles your future in the background. What makes it worse is how invisible the damage feels. There is no alarm, no warning, no moment where everything collapses at once. Instead, you adapt, you normalize it. You begin to think this version of you is stable, even while it is slowly drifting away from everything you once promised yourself. And the most dangerous part is not the habit itself, but what it teaches you about yourself. It teaches you that you are someone who gives up a little easier each time. Someone who listens to impulses more than intention. Someone who trades long-term vision for short-term relief without even noticing the exchange rate is getting worse every day. You stop trusting your own discipline because you keep breaking it in small ways that feel irrelevant. But identity is not built in big moments. It is built in the quiet repetitions nobody applauds and nobody interrupts. And when those repetitions are weak, the identity becomes weak without asking for permission. There is a strange comfort in this cycle. Even when it is destroying you, it feels familiar. And familiarity is powerful enough to keep people trapped in patterns they already know are costing them everything they want to become, and still, you repeat it again, thinking awareness alone is enough to change it. Thinking, understanding the problem is the same as escaping it. Comfort doesn't shout. It whispers. It doesn't force you down. It invites you in. It wraps failure in softness, so you don't recognize it as failure at all. It makes staying still feel like safety and moving forward feel like danger. Even when staying still is the very thing slowly erasing your potential, you don't notice when comfort becomes your addiction because it doesn't look like addiction. It looks like rest. It looks like I deserve a break. It looks like choosing yourself. But somewhere in that soft language, ambition starts getting replaced with excuses that sound reasonable enough to believe comfort is clever. It never tells you to quit your dreams. It just convinces you to delay them. It doesn't say you are weak. It says you can start tomorrow. And tomorrow becomes a cycle so familiar that you stop questioning whether tomorrow is even real anymore or just a hiding place. You keep running to the dangerous part, is how comfort reshapes your identity without confrontation. You begin to prefer ease over effort. You start choosing what feels light instead of what builds strength. And slowly, you begin to confuse lack of struggle with progress. Even when nothing inside you is actually growing, comfort convinces you that pressure is toxic, that discipline is extreme, that consistency is overrated. It tells you that anyone pushing harder is just suffering unnecessarily. And the mind loves this narrative because it removes responsibility while keeping the illusion of control intact. But comfort has a cost that doesn't show up immediately. It charges you in time, in missed chances, in skills never built, in potential never tested. The bill doesn't come daily. It comes years later when you look around and realize your life didn't evolve. It just stayed paused while everything else moved forward. What makes comfort dangerous is not that it feels good, but that it feels justified. You don't feel guilty while you're inside it. You feel correct. You feel smart for avoiding struggle. You feel like you are protecting your peace, when in reality, you are avoiding the only path that ever creates real peace. And the longer you stay inside comfort, the smaller your tolerance for discomfort becomes. Things that once felt normal start to feel hard. Effort starts to feel heavy. Discipline starts to feel unnatural. You begin to lose strength without realizing it. Like a muscle that forgets how to resist comfort also distorts urgency. It makes you believe there is always more time than there actually is. It reduces life into endless chances that will never expire. Even though everything meaningful in life has an expiration hidden inside delay, it doesn't destroy you in moments of crisis. It destroys you in moments where nothing seems wrong. That is its greatest illusion. You can be comfortable and still be falling behind. You can be relaxed and still be losing everything that matters. And while you stay inside that softness, convinced it is harmless, it continues reshaping your standards, lowering them slowly enough that you never notice you are no longer aiming where you once swore you would go. Every choice looks small when you're standing inside it. That's the illusion. You think one decision doesn't carry weight, that one skip doesn't matter, that one delay is just a moment passing harmlessly. But destiny is never built in visible explosions. It is built in quiet repetition, in things so small they feel irrelevant, while they are still shaping everything. You don't see direction changing when it changes. You only see it when you are far from where you thought you would be, and by then, it doesn't feel like a mistake anymore. It feels like a result, a natural outcome of thousands of invisible decisions you never took seriously, because each one looked too small to count. Small choices are dangerous because they don't demand attention. Nobody claps for them. Nobody warns you about them. Nobody stops you in the middle of them. You are alone with them, and that is exactly why they have power. What you repeat alone becomes what you become in public. It starts with simple things. What you choose when no one is watching. What you tolerate when nothing is urgent. What you accept as just this once. But there is no just once in behavior. There is only reinforcement. Every repeated action is a vote for the person you are becoming. And most people vote without realizing they are even in an election. The mind tries to protect you from the weight of this truth by breaking life into moments instead of patterns. It tells you this decision is isolated. It tells you it won't connect to anything bigger. But life doesn't store moments separately. It connects them all, silently, until the pattern becomes visible from a distance you can't easily return from. You think destiny is dramatic. It is not. It is accumulation, a collection of small agreements you made with yourself, and then slowly stopped honoring. A series of tiny betrayals that never felt like betrayal at the time because they were too soft to notice. Even discipline is not built in one heroic act. It is built in repeating the same standard when it is inconvenient, and weak habits are built the same way, just in the opposite direction. One repetition at a time, lowering the bar so slowly that you stop noticing it is moving. What makes small choices powerful is their invisibility. You underestimate them because they don't hurt immediately. They don't punish you right away, they wait. And while you are waiting for consequences that feel dramatic enough to react to, they are already forming your identity in silence. There is no sudden shift where everything changes. There is only drift, a gradual movement away from your potential that feels so natural you mistake it for stability. You think you are standing still, but you are actually moving in a direction you never intended to follow. And the most unsettling part is how easy it is to ignore them. Because each small choice gives you permission to ignore the next one, and the next one, until ignoring becomes your default response to everything that requires effort or discomfort. By the time you realize the pattern, it is no longer a collection of small choices. It is a life built entirely out of them, stacked so quietly that you never felt the weight while you were building it. Discipline is not something that arrives with motivation. It doesn't knock on your door when you feel ready. It doesn't wait for inspiration to light a fire inside you. Discipline is colder than that. It shows up when everything inside you is negotiating for comfort, when every excuse starts sounding logical, when your own mind becomes the first enemy you have to survive. Self-destruction doesn't look like destruction at first. It looks like relief. It looks like choosing the easier path again and again until ease becomes your identity. And the strange part is, you don't even realize you are participating in your own decline because nothing dramatic is happening. No alarms, no collapse, just quiet repetition of choices that slowly weaken your resistance to anything meaningful. Discipline interrupts that cycle. Not loudly, not emotionally, but brutally. It forces a confrontation with everything you usually avoid. It doesn't negotiate with your mood. It doesn't care about how tired you feel or how convincing your excuses sound. It simply demands action while your mind is still searching for permission to delay. Self-destruction thrives in delay. It grows in the space between intention and action. Every time you say later, something inside you shifts. Not all at once, but enough to weaken the structure you are trying to build. And over time, those small delays become a pattern, and the pattern becomes a personality that avoids pressure at any cost. Discipline breaks that personality slowly. It doesn't erase your impulses, it outlives them. It stands there while your mind creates stories designed to protect comfort. Stories about timing, energy, readiness, fairness. Stories that sound intelligent, but are actually just disguised avoidance. What makes discipline powerful is not intensity, but repetition. It is the ability to act even when every internal voice is arguing against it, and that repetition builds something. Self-destruction cannot survive for long. It builds resistance, it builds awareness, It builds a version of you that stops believing every thought that tries to pull you backward. Self-destruction often disguises itself as identity. You start saying things like "this is just how I am," or "I can't focus," or "I always mess up." These are not truths, they are patterns that were never challenged long enough to change. And discipline is the challenge that forces those patterns to expose themselves. There is a strange conflict inside every person. One side seeks comfort at any cost. The other side knows comfort is slowly erasing everything meaningful. Discipline is the voice that refuses to let comfort become law. It doesn't argue emotionally. It simply acts in spite of resistance, and resistance always shows up. Not as something external, but internal. Fatigue that appears suddenly, doubt that feels convincing, urgency that shifts away from what actually matters. The mind becomes creative when it is trying to avoid growth, and discipline has to cut through that creativity without hesitation. Self-destruction is patient. It doesn't rush you into failure, it slowly normalizes it. It lowers your standards in small increments until what once felt unacceptable becomes routine. And by the time you notice, you are already operating far below what you were capable of becoming. Discipline reverses that direction. But it does not feel heroic while doing it. It feels uncomfortable, repetitive, even isolating, because it forces you to act while others are still negotiating with their excuses. It forces you to move while your mind is still trying to understand why moving is necessary, and in that constant conflict, something starts to change quietly. The pull of self-destruction doesn't disappear, it just loses authority. It starts sounding less convincing each time you refuse it, less powerful each time you override it, less permanent each time you interrupt it, until even the idea of giving in starts feeling unfamiliar, like something that used to control you, but no longer fits the shape you are growing into. Even though the pull is still there in the background, still trying, still watching, still waiting for a moment of weakness that hasn't arrived yet. Excuses don't sound like lies when you tell them to yourself. They sound reasonable, they sound smart, they sound like protection, and that is what makes them dangerous. They don't fight you, they agree with you. They don't stop your progress with force, they dissolve it with logic that feels correct in the moment. Excuses are invisible architects of failure. They don't destroy your future in one strike. They build it differently than you intended, one justification at a time. Every time you say, "I'm tired," every time you say, "I'll start tomorrow," every time you say, "This isn't the right time," something small is being rewritten inside your direction. And the mind never questions excuses because they are designed to reduce pressure. They feel like relief. They give you permission to escape discomfort without feeling like you escaped anything important. That is their trick. They let you avoid responsibility while still believing you are in control. Excuses don't appear randomly. They grow in environments where discipline is weak, where small actions are not taken seriously, where repetition is inconsistent. In those spaces, excuses become the default response to anything that requires effort. And once they become default, they don't need permission anymore. You start noticing a pattern, but only after it becomes familiar. Every time something difficult appears, your mind quickly generates a reason not to engage. Not because you cannot, but because your brain has learned that avoidance is easier to justify than action is to sustain. And the most dangerous part is how intelligent excuses sound. They don't say, "I don't want to." They say, "I should wait." They say, "I need better conditions." They say, "I will perform better later." These are not statements of truth. They are negotiations with fear, wearing a mask of logic. Excuses also protect identity. Because if you admit you are avoiding something, you have to confront your own discipline. But if you blame timing, energy, or circumstances, then you don't have to change anything about yourself. That is why excuses feel safe. They shift responsibility away from where it actually belongs over time. Excuses become a habit stronger than action. You stop responding to life directly and start responding through filters of justification. And every justification weakens your ability to act without explanation. You begin to believe that action always needs perfect conditions. Even though growth never comes from perfect conditions, excuses also distort time. They convince you that you are not losing progress, just postponing it. But postponement repeated enough times becomes absence. And absence repeated enough times becomes regret that feels sudden even though it was built slowly. There is also a silent agreement that forms between you and your excuses. You stop challenging them and they stop questioning you. And in that agreement, comfort expands while effort shrinks. You don't notice the shift because it happens gradually, but the results appear later as distance between you and your potential. What makes excuses powerful is not their truth, but your willingness to accept them without resistance. Every excuse you accept once becomes easier to accept again. And repetition gives them authority they were never supposed to have at some point. Excuses stop sounding like interruptions and start sounding like identity. You begin to recognize yourself through them. I always struggle with consistency. I never have enough time. These are not facts. They are patterns that have been repeated so often they feel permanent, and while all this happens, nothing dramatic occurs. No collapse, no alarm. Just slow erosion of action, replaced by increasingly sophisticated ways of avoiding it, until avoidance feels normal and effort feels like something optional instead of necessary. Your future doesn't change in a single moment. It doesn't suddenly collapse or suddenly rise. It reflects something much more silent, much more consistent, something you keep repeating without thinking about the cost. It reflects your routines. Routines are not just schedules. They are identity in disguise. They are what you do when you are not trying to impress anyone, when no one is watching, when there is no pressure to perform. And that is where your real direction is written, not in your intentions, but in your repetition. People like to believe their future is decided by big decisions. But big decisions only reveal what your small routines have already built. The truth is, your daily patterns are quietly negotiating your destiny long before you become aware of the outcome. Every routine carries weight, even the ones that feel insignificant. Waking up late, delaying work, avoiding effort, consuming distraction instead of focus. Each one looks harmless in isolation, but together they form a system that either strengthens you or slowly weakens your ability to grow. Your routines are honest in a way your words are not. You can say you want success, discipline, change, progress. But your routines reveal whether that desire has structure or whether it is just a thought passing through your mind without foundation, and the mind adapts to whatever you repeat. If you repeat comfort, comfort becomes your baseline. If you repeat avoidance, avoidance becomes your default response. If you repeat discipline, Discipline becomes less of a struggle and more of a pattern. Your body follows without negotiation. The frightening part is how invisible this shaping process is. You don't feel your future being formed while it is happening. You only recognize it when outcomes appear, and by then, the routines that created those outcomes are already deeply embedded routines also decide your limits. Not in a direct way, but by slowly adjusting what you tolerate from yourself. A disciplined routine raises expectations without words. A weak routine lowers them without warning. And over time, your standard for yourself becomes a reflection of what you repeatedly allow. There is no neutral routine. Even doing nothing repeatedly becomes a routine of inaction. Even delay repeated becomes a system of postponement. And systems, once formed, don't stay passive. They start influencing your decisions automatically. What makes routines powerful is their invisibility. You don't question them every day because they feel normal. And anything that feels normal rarely gets examined. Even when it is shaping your entire direction in silence, the mind prefers routines because they remove decision fatigue. But what feels like efficiency can also become limitation. Because when your routine is weak, your automatic behavior becomes weak, and you stop needing conscious thought to remain stuck, and slowly, your future becomes predictable not because it is fixed, but because your routines keep producing the same type of results. The repetition creates stability, but not necessarily growth. Even when you try to change, your routines resist. Not because they are alive, but because they are familiar. And familiarity is powerful enough to pull you back into patterns that once felt harmless, but now define your limits without asking permission. Your future is not waiting somewhere far away. It is already forming inside what you repeat today, inside what you choose without thinking, inside what you allow to continue, even when you know it is shaping something you may not be ready to face later.